everyone, and welcome back to Mach 1 Mindset. Today we're diving into AP European History 1.9, the Atlantic Slave Trade. Before we get started, please make sure you like, subscribe, and of course comment down below if you have any questions. Let's get into it. Today we're going to examine the Atlantic Slave Trade and its role in shaping early modern European economies, African societies, and the Americas. From the 15th to the 19th centuries, European powers forcibly transported millions of Africans across the Atlantic to supply labor for colonial plantations. The slave trade was central to European expansion and the development of the Atlantic world. The Atlantic slave trade emerged directly from the Age of Exploration and the Columbian Exchange. As European powers established colonies in the Americas, they required a large number of reliable labor force to cultivate cash crops such as sugar, tobacco, and coffee. Indigenous populations declined rapidly due to disease and forced labor, leading Europeans to increasingly rely on enslaved Africans. The process of enslavement began in Africa. Many Africans were captured through warfare, raids, or kidnapping, or often involving African intermediaries who traded captives to European merchants. Captives were forced to march to the coast where they had held fortified trading posts controlled by European powers, such as Portugal, England, and the Netherlands. These forts became key centers in the global slave trade. From the African coast, enslaved Africans were transported across the Atlantic in a journey known as the Middle Passage. This voyage connected Africa to the Americas and formed the central leg of the triangular trade system. European ships transported enslaved people to the Americas, where they were sold to plantation owners and mine operators. A significant percentage of captives did not survive the journey, making the Middle Passage one of the deadliest components of the Atlantic world. Upon arrival in the Americas, enslaved Africans were sold at markets and forced into labor. Many were sent to sugar plantations in the Caribbean and Brazil, while others worked on tobacco plantations, coffee estates, or in mines. Colonial governments passed laws that defined enslaved people as property, denying them legal rights and ensuring lifelong servitude. These laws also made slavery hereditary, reinforcing the racial hierarchies that shaped colonial societies. The Atlantic slave trade developed over several centuries. Portugal was the first European power to engage in a large-scale slave trading, transporting enslaved Africans to Europe and later to Brazil. Spain relied heavily on enslaved labor in its American colonies, but often outsourced the trade through systems such as the Ancetio, which granted foreign companies the right to supply enslaved Africans. By the 17th century, England, France, and the Netherlands had become major participants. Trading companies such as the Royal African Company and the Dutch West India Company dominated slave transportation. The 18th century marked the height of the slave trade, with Britain and Portugal responsible for the majority of enslaved Africans transported to the Americas. The slave trade operated with a triangular trade system. European merchants shipped manufactured goods such as textiles and weapons to Africa in exchange for enslaved people. These individuals were transported to the Americas, where enslaved labor produced raw materials like sugar, cotton, and tobacco. These goods were then shipped back to Europe, generating immense wealth for European states and merchants. The economic impact on Europe was significant. Profits from slavery and plantation agriculture fueled mercantilist economies, financed industrial development, and strengthened European empires. Major port cities such as Liverpool, Nantes, and Amsterdam grew wealthy through slave trading and Atlantic commerce. In contrast, the impact on Africa was devastating. The loss of millions of people weakened societies, disrupted political structures, and increased internal conflict. Some African states became dependent on slave trade, while others collapsed under its pressure. Resistance to slavery existed throughout the period. Enslaved Africans resisted through revolts, escapes, and preservation of cultural traditions. Over time, opposition to the slave trade also grew in Europe. Enlightenment thinkers questioned the morality of slavery, and religious groups such as the Quakers advocated abolition. By the late 18th and 19th centuries, abolition movements gained momentum. Britain banned the transatlantic slave trade in 1807 and later abolished slavery throughout its empire. Other nations followed, though enforcement was uneven. Brazil became the last country in the Americas to abolish slavery in 1888. In conclusion, the Atlantic slave trade was a defining feature in early modern history. It fueled European economic growth and imperial expansion while devastating African societies and subjecting millions to forced labor. The legacy of the slave trade shaped racial hierarchies, global economies, and social structures that continue to influence the modern world.